Um, I'll deal with the bond issue first. I've represented several individuals in this state that have been charged with murder, and it's not at all uncommon that they be held without bond. So I wasn't at all surprised that the DA asked for $1 million bond, nor was I surprised that the judge actually granted it. I asked for a $250,000 bond because in my opinion I felt that that was a reasonable bond, that even if the family could post it, it was one that would serve the purpose of both protecting the community as well as assuring Ms. Chambers' appearance. But of course the judge disagreed and set bond at $1 million.
Which is basically like keeping her in jail because it doesn't appear as though her family will be able to come up with that much money.
That's correct.
Okay. And can you talk about the mental state of your client? You said when you spoke with her most recently, she didn't seem to have a comprehension of what had happened or what was going on.
That's correct. And that is the exact same Ms. Chambers that presented to me on Saturday evening, the same day of this incident. She seems to lack in her ability to understand what we're doing right now. I mentioned to her yet again that there were people that actually died in this incident, and her face was unmoved, unchanged, no sign of emotion. The flat effect is what I experienced. Again, inappropriate responses to information that I would provide her. Her answers to my questions were inconsistent, but more importantly, the look in her face. There's a very blank, almost lifeless look in her face, and that is the exact same person that I visited with on Saturday.
And you had mentioned or spoke to you in the hallway that she has been in mental facilities before, and I thought that was worth mentioning so everybody else.
That is correct. Her father shared with me that as recent as 2 years ago, she was in Wagner Mental Health Facility in Wagner, Oklahoma. She was there for approximately 2 weeks. During that 2-week period of time, she was prescribed meds. He did not know the exact type of meds she was on. However, during a visitation, when Dad visited her, she was foaming at the mouth. Her arms were extended out, and his exact words were she was in like a zombie-like state. And within maybe a week or so, I guess they adjusted the meds or prescribed something other than what she was on. She gained her ability to be normal, I guess is what you would say, and they ultimately released her. And not long thereafter, there was another episode. I don't know what the exact episode was, but there was another episode, and they at that time took her to the Cherokee hospital because she's Cherokee Indian. They took her there, and they didn't provide her with any assistance at all. They said there was nothing they could do to help her.
Now, the person that her father and her aunt and boyfriend described here was a very normal sounding person on Friday night and Saturday morning, and that seems to not match with the person that you're describing on Saturday afternoon.
That's correct. Well, that also doesn't match the person that witnesses say drove this car into a crowd of people. So that's absolutely accurate to say that. Her employer said that when she reported to work, she was fine. Certainly didn't appear to be under the influence of anything, drugs or alcohol or anything. And it's unclear. I think we have heard 2 accounts on why she left. We know for a fact she did leave work, but we don't know why. We don't know if she was sent home by her employer, or we don't know if she left on her own, but she did in fact leave. But I believe the statement from her employer was that when she left, she seemed absolutely fine. They had no concerns about her at all. And they certainly didn't think that she was on her way to do what ultimately happened.
She was not able to confirm that when you talked to her about why she left?
She did in fact share some things with me, and that's something I'm not at liberty to disclose. But I can certainly say this, it wasn't anything sinister. Her reason for leaving wasn't, you wouldn't think that that'd be a reason for a person to leave, and that will come out later, of course.
For her being under the influence, have you seen blood tests, toxicology reports? Do you have any information
No.
regarding
No.
So police they've charged her with the DUI. It's listed among those charges. What does that mean to you? How do you interpret that?
Well, I interpret it as the information I received was that while they're at the scene, she was subjected to a standardized field sobriety test. She wasn't subjected to the intoxilizer. I don't think that there was any evidence at that point that warranted her blowing, for a better lack of terms. Generally, when there's a smell of alcohol coming from a person's body, that is probably one of the first that law enforcement will go to is the intoxilizer, and then from there, they'll move to the standardized field sobriety test. My understanding is that she was subjected to the standardized field sobriety test based upon her performance while being subject to the standardized field sobriety test is what gave the officers proper cause to believe that she was impaired, that her ability to operate a motor vehicle was impaired.
Previous criminal history?
None. Absolutely none. Zero.
In your opinion, is this a mental health case instead of intoxicants?
That's always been my position. However, I want to be very, very careful on how we throw that term around, mental illness, because I think that her ability, there's been some information about maybe she was diabetic. I've yet to confirm that, and we know that hypoglycemia can cause people to have symptoms that are consistent with someone that's would appear or present as if they're intoxicated. That was among the realm of possibilities, but I think that may be ruled out. I'm not certain of that. So that leaves us, especially if the toxicology report comes back and there's absolutely nothing in her system, as we suspect that will be the case, then that leaves us with only one option, and that's a mental illness of some sort. And again, just as her father said earlier, exactly what it is, we do not know. While she was at Wagner, because she's an adult, her diagnosis, if any, was not released or disclosed to her father. So we have no idea what was identified when she was treated at that time. So I'm of the opinion that we know that mental illness and those that suffer from mental illnesses, it can be a gradual process that will manifest itself over time, and then it also can be one that's abrupt and can display out in very violent fashions. We don't know which one this is, which is why I'm moving very quickly to get her evaluated.
Do you know when the family will be able to see her?
They're visiting with her now. And that was one of the things that when I first walked in that I felt it appropriate to do was try to arrange a visitation for her and her dad. He hasn't seen her since this happened, and as he mentioned to you, when he found out about it from his mother, screaming and crying, saying to him what had happened, and it's been surreal for them since Saturday. Which, make no mistake about it, that's not to compare what the victims and their families are going through, but just to sort of give a flavor of what the Chambers are going through as well.
To see her in the video today, did she look any different today versus when you saw her on Saturday?
No, actually. In fact, though, I would say she was a little bit more withdrawn today. When I looked at her on the video screen, her head was slightly down. She wouldn't raise it up. She was hardly audible when the judge asked if she could hear what was going on. She didn't respond with an alertness that you would expect under the circumstances. And prior to the arraignment beginning, I explained to her what was about to transpire, and just to see if she understood. And again, her response was inconsistent and inappropriate is the best way I can describe it.
On that, Mr. Coleman, she's been described as a Christian, somebody with a moral compass. Are you saying in your conversations with Ms. Chambers you haven't seen any sense of morality in her?
I've not seen a sense of anything right now. I mean, she's totally lacking in emotion. She's totally lacking. She has an inability to express herself with facial expressions. Certainly, again, as I said, inconsistent with what you would expect for someone in her position. You would expect there to be some raw emotions of some type, especially when it's been communicated that people lost lives here. And I shared that with her, and her response was, "Can you remind me what we've talked about? Tell me what we've talked about." And at that point, I just didn't feel it, necessary for me to go back through and recant things, because I only know what's been reported so far. As you learned today, the district attorney has yet to even file the formal charges, and because the formal charges have not been filed, I do not have the formal information in my hand. So all the detail that's necessary for me to have an intelligent conversation with her, I'm lacking.
The state mentioned the fifth victim. Have you heard anything about their status?
I have not. In fact, I just learned about it moments ago while we were in court when the district attorney mentioned that they were not hopeful at this point, or I don't know if that was the exact words, don't quote me on that, but I think she led the court to believe that that person is not doing well. But I don't know the name, anything about that victim, no.
Sir, we were told that for purposes of this hearing, your client is presumed guilty. How unusual is that? Is that something unique to Oklahoma law?
That is not unusual at all. And what they were speaking of specifically was as it relates to bond, only as it relates to bond. And I think that that's the same pretty much nationwide. When you're making an argument for bond, the person that you're arguing for bond is presumed guilty of those charges. Now, make no mistake about it, not guilty to a point where the case is over, but guilty to a point where it gives the prosecutor a basis to argue for the public safety and so forth and so on as it relates to bond and bond only.
Do you think bond will be posted?
I'm sorry?
Do you think bond will be posted?
I don't think so. I think that Dad responded that there was no way that they could post $1 million bond.
Do they have to charge at a certain point here soon, or what's that situation since you're surprised that they didn't see the charging?
Well, I'm surprised that the DA only asked for 10 days. Again, I've represented individuals charged with murder where they've asked for 30 days. And even in some instances, once you reach that 30 day, they'll ask for yet another extension and the court will grant it simply because of the nature of the charge. So the fact that they asked for 10 days didn't surprise me, and it certainly didn't surprise me that the court granted it.